Okay, so today we're going to be looking at how does the Industrial Revolution impact society in general. In particular, we're going to try and answer the question, as I have at the bottom of the screen, does the Industrial Revolution actually advance society? So, let's just look back at a little bit that we covered on Friday, and then sort of start talking about the things going ahead. One of the things that I tried to point out in the video for Friday was why did the Industrial Revolution begin in Britain in the mid 18th century? And we talked about how it then spreads from Britain to the rest of Europe, France, and then also obviously to the United States. The big piece that comes out of this is that there's huge urbanization, right? People start moving to cities to be closer to their jobs, and even factories themselves start producing their own homes for their workers, right? Again, this way trying to both control but also support their workers. This obviously also has massive impacts in terms of telecommunication, right? The beginning of telegraph and all that, but it also begins, obviously, the railroad industry and movement of people. So let's talk about how this affects society in general. So when people start moving into the cities, we're talking, and as we talked in the last video, tremendous growth in the population of some cities, right? So you have, over the course of the 19th century, you have cities like Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, growing by exceptional amounts. You know what? Well, one of them was like six times, right? So these factory growths are leading to huge amounts of people coming into these urban environments. However, the real problem here is that cities do not have the capability of keeping up with this massive population growth, so that when they see this huge increase in the number of people in society, what you're seeing here is massive amounts of dirt and disorder, crowded tenements because there's just not enough places to put these people. And you have really big urban problems, right? So sanitary codes are non-existent. So there's garbage in the street, there's human feces in the street because there's no sewer system. So where are you going to throw that stuff? There's no Department of Sanitation to come around and clean up people's garbages. So all of these impacts are creating very messy and very dirty environments. Even along with that, right? The streets are unpaved. So when you have unpaved streets, all of this rainwater that we're experiencing and all of the garbage that's being thrown is just littering the streets and then creating massive problems. Those two situations that I've just described create massive amounts of disease. So that in cities like London in the late 19th century, you have a massive cholera outbreak. And cholera is something that is spread through exposure to human feces. So how are people getting exposed to this? Well, what happens is you throw your waste into the street and it seeps into the ground, and then when you pump the water out of the well, where's that stuff coming from, right? So what you have is extreme urban dirt, extreme urban poverty, and this is translating into massive amounts of disease and disorder within these communities. Again, remember, as we said in the previous video, right? One of the things that happens in this period is you have massive population growth, right? Global population hits 1 billion people for the first time in 1800, and then it doubles nearly every 30 or 40 years. So you have this huge number of people crowding into places that do not need to have this many people or should not have these many people. You're also talking about a period where your heat doesn't come from the boiler in your basement, but rather your heat comes from coal and wood, right? So when you are burning those things, they create massive amounts of soot and massive amounts of dirt. So cities are just dirty, and you're talking huge amounts of pollution, and it's a very dirty place to be. There's also, if you remember back to our Adam Smith, right, there's also this massive amount of growth of this idea of laissez-faire economics, right, to let alone. Now, the only problem with that is that governments don't intervene in work conditions for the people of the factories. So what you have happening is huge amounts of inequality among the people within these factories. People are working next to really dangerous machinery. People are working very long hours. You're talking 12 to 14 hours a day. And you could be fired at the drop of a hat. It's extremely, extremely dangerous work. There's no minimum wage. So people are being paid pennies for the jobs that they're doing. And children as young as 8 or 9, at least in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, are working in these factories. So you have tremendous amounts of just awful treatment for people in all, at all ages and in all communities. People are moving into the cities because of the jobs, because of the income security. Remember, one of the things that happens if you're a farmer, you may have a drought, you may have too much rain, you may have too hot of a summer, too cold of a summer, and all of that impacts how much money you can make. But at least if you work in a factory, you're guaranteed to make whatever it is you're guaranteed to make. So all of these things are causing people to move into cities to seek better opportunity, although the opportunities may be really difficult. So one of the big changes that happens, and we've talked about this as well, is that there's a change in your lifestyle of work, right? So for agrarian work, you may work 2/3 of the year. You may work rather long days, 8 to 12 hours a day, but it's seasonal, right? You work from roughly March or so through to about September, October, and then November, December, January, February, you've pretty much got, time to get things ready for the next season. Get a plow set up, tend to the farm animals, but you're not doing a ton of work. Now when you switch to transition to factory labor, you're working 99% of the year. You're working 6 days a week. You're working 12 to 14 hours a day. You never get any holidays off. You never get anything, right? You get a Sunday off typically. Because again, Britain and France, all these countries are still Christian countries, so they're changing that. It's also extremely monotonous, right? Where farm labor, you're doing these outdoor tasks and you're tending the farm. Your life may be better because you are working at least with some sort of purpose. Here in the factories, you're doing the same thing day in and day out. But these jobs are extremely, extremely dangerous. There are no laws to make the jobs that people do safer. So people are working these positions that are extremely, extremely dangerous. If you're working in clothing mills, if you're working in factories, you're working in things that are these massive machines that are exposed. Big belts are just whirring around, moving parts with no exterior protection. And again, you're talking with kids that are extremely young, 8, 10 years old. And if a kid or anybody else gets injured, there's no insurance to protect them, right? They're on their own to figure out how to survive after this, right? They may be unemployable, but there's nothing there to protect them. There was also no, fire code protection, right? So there's no sprinklers as we would have today. So these massive amounts of factories are dealing with these big, hot, smelly machines, but there's no protections in case they go on fire. when you start looking at the mines, now the mines are a little interesting, right? So the mines, we're talking here about coal mines in particular, right? There are big ditches that are dug into the ground to go down to the coal seams. And when you get to the coal seams, right, you have to put charges of explosive in to break the coal up. It comes down, and then you take the coal out. You're dealing with explosives in front of very flammable material underground in caves, right? So you're blowing stuff up, and the chances of that stuff falling down on you are extreme. So there's often coal mine collapses. There's fires beginning in the mine because, again, you're using dynamite. You have dangerous gases such as natural gas being exposed. So you take little canary, little chirpy birds that are, if they stop chirping, they're dead and get out because there's natural gas. There's diseases that come, right? People are breathing coal dust into their lungs, right? So there's no respirators for people to protect themselves. So people are getting extremely sick. It's extremely tough work, and extremely dangerous work, but no protections for the people. And then you have child labor. Child labor are massively exploited children, right? These children are making pennies relative to what their parents would be making. They are experiencing some of the worst treatment, and we'll talk about that on the next video. But these kids are working extremely long hours, not going to school, in brutal conditions. But again, they're just kids, right? I mean, they're 8 to 10 years old. They are very, very young people experiencing these really, really tough things. In our last couple of moments here, right, we're going to be talking about the activity that I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to give you a set of documents, a DBQ, and I'm going to ask you to analyze and examine what are the conditions that people are experiencing in the Industrial Revolution. And I'm really going to ask you, did the Industrial Revolution make society better? You're going to look at the documents. There's a couple of questions on each. You're going to read the documents, answer the questions, and then write a 300-word response.